If you can not raise money, obviously giving away equity, it seems very inexpensive in the beginning, but it is one of the most expensive ways to pay for things.
Jeff Hirsch, founder and CEO.
I often say that the financial engineering of a company can be as important as the product engine. And I say that because I've seen some companies where founders get to a point where they're desperate to raise money. And, smart investors know how to take advantage of that situation. I don't mean they're being evil. It's their job to use their money to generate as much returns as they can.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing today?
I'm good, Dan. Good to see you.
You too. Pretty psyched about this conversation. You and I haven't caught up in a little while, but I became very fond of working for you for several years when we were at Audience Science together. You were a wonderful leader and an executive. And today I want to just dig in and talk to you about the whole world of startups and how you, in your experience, navigated that world, what you found to be interesting and valuable, and what lessons you could share with others, and all that sort of stuff. So thanks for being on the podcast show today.
Well, pleasure.
Great. So let's hear about your story. I know you've been a founder multiple times. You've been a C-level executive at other startups. I've been your employee. You're a board member for multiple companies. You've seen it all from every angle, perhaps even some investment as well. And you could share that if you want. I'd love to hear some of that. But what's your story? What have you done specifically?
Well, Dan, it's a very long story, so I'm not going to tell you the whole thing. But I did start in sales and advertising when I was a senior in college. I started selling advertisements for the school newspaper and found that I really enjoyed understanding people's marketing problems and helping to solve them. Of course, that was very small scale, but a big recognition at that age to see that there was something I was both good at and really enjoyed. So that took me through. I had a short career in radio, owned an advertising agency, my first startup in the Central Coast of California, which I had for a few years. That was something we built really just on our own credit cards, really. Ended up with 25 people and hundreds of millions of dollars in billing. Very great experience. One of my lessons there I can share later. And now is about partnerships and some of the trials that you can find yourself in when you have a partner in a business. After that, I started another company with a friend, which was a software company. We sold systems to film and video production and post-production companies. And we got that company on the Inc. 500 list of fast small companies. Yeah, it's interesting because you know me from my advertising technology and MarTech backgrounds, which I've been doing since 1999. But I really had two careers before that. So the software company, and then I did go into the ad tech world, found a company in Santa Barbara called ValueClick, recognized that a lot of what was happening in offline media would be happening in online media, and joined up with them. Was pretty aggressive in innovative thinking, and that led me to be one of the founders of another company called FastClick. That company did an exit within a Series A. It was founded with friends and family money, and then did an IPO shortly thereafter. A few other, shorter stints, and then I joined a company, which is where you and I met, which was originally called Revenue Science. It was an interesting journey. For the first 2 years, I was the chief revenue officer, a title that I know you're very familiar with, and then took over as the CEO after 2 years, and did that for a little over 3 years. So super interesting to go from being the revenue leader and all things revenue to being the CEO and having that as part of my mandate. That's where it was great to have someone like you to come aboard, where I realized quickly I did not have to do everything in that regard because I had a trusted partner, you, that could handle a lot of it. And that's part of the lesson that I learned along the way, was when you find good people, it's an obvious statement, but let them do their job. And that worked out very well for both of us for a period of time. A few other things, and most recently, public officer of a company, Pubmatic, which went public during the COVID times, and that was very successful as well. Now I'm running a consulting firm doing strategic consulting, go-to-market consulting called Executive Guru, and enjoying being involved with many founders, many companies, and bringing some of the things I've learned to the table to help them be more successful.
So for the most part, these are all in the advertising ecosystem, yes?
Advertising ecosystem and a lot of early stage companies.
Yep. So here you are, a board member today for several startups, companies, et cetera. And you know what it's like to have started a company back in the early 2000s. What's changed?
I think there's more of a recognition of how to raise money and what it takes to raise money. And certainly in the space that I'm in advertising technology, the value of investing in these companies. Obviously, we see some that take off and we would love to be part of, like a Google, but smaller companies can do very well to boot. So I think one of the biggest changes is that recognition and resources that you can turn to help you find how to raise money and how to get started. I had an idea in 1996 in the ad tech space, and it was an idea that later became very standard in the industry, which is an advertising network. But at the time, I had no clue how to raise money. I wrote a business plan far too long, and I didn't know how to raise money, and there was no resources I could turn to help me learn how to do that at the stage I was at. So I didn't get very far with that, but it was the impetus to get me into the space. But I think that's one of the biggest changes is the environment we're in nurtures people to start up companies.
So it's hard to raise money now. 2 years ago, it wasn't hard or wasn't as difficult as it is today. And what I see from my perspective, talking to the founders who I work with regularly, they don't want to raise money if they don't have to. It used to be that was par for the course. That's what you did. You raised money. You spent a lot of time raising money. Now it seems like, well, I don't know that I want to do that. It's not necessarily in my best interest. Maybe I'll do some friends and family and get going, and then I'm just going to bootstrap this thing and fly as fast and as hard as I can and be very, very careful with how I spend every dollar because it's precious. So what would be your advice to a founder today who's thinking, all right, I'm in the early stages, I've taken some friends and family money, what do I want to do to grow this company?
Well, look, first of all, I think that it's a tough choice about whether to raise money or not, and if you are, how much. No matter whatever stage you're at. And some of the things that you have to strategize about and try to work through in doing so are things that you've never experienced before. So like if I do raise money and I can accelerate the growth of my sales team, for instance, what is that going to do for me versus bootstrapping? And does bootstrapping allow other competitors to have a bigger advantage? So there's a lot of pieces to try to figure out. If you can not raise money, obviously giving away equity, it seems very inexpensive in the beginning, but later it is one of the most expensive ways to pay for things, and paying for money is one of them. I often say that the financial engineering of a company can be as important as the product engineering. And I say that because I've seen some companies where founders get to a point where they're desperate to raise money, and smart investors know how to take advantage of that situation. I don't mean they're being evil. It's their job to use their money to generate as much returns as they can. So you'll often raise money, raise it in with the wrong terms, raise too much, you give away too much percentage, and then you're in trouble later on when you can't raise money again because you've diluted yourself too much and things like that. So I think it's very important that when you're raising money that you're not only looking at what you think your immediate needs are, but that you have a trusted advisor who can help you look at what should the structure of these be. And again, the further you get down the line of needing money, obviously the less negotiating clout you will have and that. But raising money and each investor is a negotiation, and every single one of them is like that.
What did you do during your startup times?
Well, it's, when you're raising money at Audience Science. We were raising money, and we had to spend weeks putting together the right material. We had to look at comparable companies, and then we had to go out and do meetings. And when you do meetings in an environment like that, which meant that we had already raised some money as a company before either you or I got there, and we were going out to raise more, you're out talking to 35, 50 companies, talking about the same story every time. Basically, the way I looked at it to myself is, this is one of the largest sales opportunities I have, was to sell me, to sell the company, to bring in someone to buy part of the company, essentially. And treating it that way helped me look at it kind of like as an enterprise sale, where how do I make sure I understand all the talking points? How do I make sure that I understand what this investor is looking for, doing some discovery ahead of time, and then being there and addressing those things as much upfront as you can and being ready for the questions.
So now here you are, a board member, and you see your, let's go switch gears a little bit. As an investor, I'm sure you get a lot of startup deals put in front of you on a regular basis. What are you looking for? And do you take advantage if you need to, or if you see that there's opportunity where maybe, the company is desperate and you think that it's got a good product? I mean, let's call it what it is. Now you're on the other side of the table.
I think we want to all maximize our opportunities. So taking advantage is probably a little further than I go as an individual, just with my own ethical standards. But if the deal is being put together and someone else is leading the deal and the terms, then yes, I would take advantage of that. I think that I lost my place.
Yeah, we're talking about when you're as an investor. What are you looking for from the founders? What are you seeing out there? What do you think some of the mistakes are? So give me some experiences, any stories that you've got that are just, crazy.
I think that when talking to investors, these are entrepreneurs, right? These are people who have put their heart and soul into their business. And that's traditionally the type of person who is raising money. And that creates all kinds of different side effects, right? So they're very emotionally involved in the business. And the good part about that is the passion, right? I mean, if we all had that passion, we could sell anything. The bad part is that you become somewhat blinded to potential realities. So one of the first things that I do when I'm looking at an investment is really try to understand that. I'm an EQ type of person, right? So I want to understand, does this founder understand the position that they're in? Do they understand the role that they're playing? Do they understand how their passion may also cloud their vision for what might be the right decisions or the right path to go down? If I find a leader who has that ability to self-reflect, that's very encouraging. So that to me is almost equal in importance to how viable the product or business is to invest in. And then, the next step is looking at the terms. Most companies, obviously, you want to invest in already have found product market fit and already have some traction, so that you're able to have something to measure against as things start to grow.
Yep. What about leadership? How do you determine whether the person who you're investing in, and you said, you're really looking at the person and their passion, as well as obviously the product and what it solves and how big the market is. But and I'm going to talk to you a lot about leadership because I worked under your leadership, and I want you to share some of those values and that sort of thing. But so here you are sitting across the table from a founder, and you're trying to understand whether or not this person's going to be a good leader for the people who your money is going to be used to hire. So what are you looking for?
I think one of the things is humility. So the ability to take feedback and accept it. If you're talking to a founder, you're going to invest, perhaps be on the board, and they're not able to take input around what you're seeing in their plan, that's not a good sign, because that's going to carry forward through not only that board and the investor group, but it's going to carry forward to how they work with their people. So one of the things that I am always looking for is someone who has that humility to understand that they don't know everything. The other side of that is some people say, I only make data-driven decisions. And of course, data is critical in making decisions. It can also be overplayed. Uh, there is a place where you have enough data to make a decision that either if you make the decision or you don't, and if you keep trying to collect data, the opportunity's passed. If you don't have enough data, you probably can't make the decision. But in the middle is that space where intuition and experience can help you understand what that data is really telling you instead of using data to tell what you think you want to tell.
What if it's critical for you as a founder or board member to make a decision? You got to make it by XYZ date, but you don't necessarily have all the data to make a great decision, but you can make a good enough decision and then perhaps perfect it from there. How would you approach that?
Colin Powell has a deck on leadership, and one of the pages is about the probability of decision making, and he says that between 40 to 70% of the information available is the sweet spot. If you have under 40, you don't have enough. If you have over 70, you waited too long. And he's talking about going to war, right? So certainly in business, we're not going to be at that drastic place, hopefully. I think that's about right, that 40 to 70%, and then relying on intuition after that. One thing I want to say about intuition, I think this applies to leadership and to how to build a company, is intuition is built on experience. Experience in this case is really creates pattern matching capabilities, right? So intuition to me comes from having seen a lot of things and then getting a sense of what is or what will happen based on that experience and the current data. So that pattern recognition is going to be different for each person. You and I, Dan, have different experiences. We're going to have different pattern recognition. And if I'm only allowed to rely on yours because you're the founder, I don't think that's going to create the most productive relationship or environment. And again, that's why I think it's so important on boards to have diverse people on the board, because you get these different patterns that end up contributing to that intuition that helps you take data and make really good decisions.
I like that whole intuition thing. Let's talk about the board itself, or boards themselves. So you are one across multiple companies. How does a founder use the board to get the most help possible? How do you just squeeze a shit ton of value out of your board? Because I found it to be sometimes hard. And I've also found, quite frankly, I've had great boards. I've had not so great boards. Yeah. Send us who you want to meet, and we'll look at our networks and see where we can introduce you. And guess what? You never get introductions. You never do. And then you chase after. Finally, it becomes a hollow statement. But how can a founder use you or a good board to help benefit the business?
Well, when I first became a CEO and had a board, I was very excited about a board meeting. We had all these super smart people coming into a room. We were going to have this vibrant conversation about the business, the industry we're in, and how we're going to build and all that. And then I found out that's not really what a board does, and at least in the board meeting. And that's not what I was going to get out of the board in those meetings. That's more about getting approvals and some discussion and things like that. So what I started to do, and I did it at Audience Science, was to go meet with each board member 2 weeks or so before the board meeting. And I would spend a few hours with them and go over everything I wanted to talk about. By doing that, by the time the board meeting came along, first of all, that was a much more dynamic conversation. You could have real conversations about their patterns that they recognized from what I was experiencing, the things that they could bring to the table, and we could have a very fruitful discussion because it was one-to-one. It was very candid. And by the time we got to the board meeting, they pretty much knew where I wanted to take things. It doesn't mean they had already agreed. There was still discussion, but everyone was somewhat aligned, at least had the same amount of information coming into the meeting so we could have a better meeting, more efficient, and hopefully have some time to really talk through a couple issues.
That's super helpful. What would you tell a founder to prepare, or what should the deck look like for the board meeting if you were to just kind of organize it in an outline?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could answer that off the top of my head. I think the important thing is to think like your board members rather than you. Don't put in it what you think should be in it. Put in it what you think the board wants to see, and that's going to be, a true picture of the company, the state it's in. Real conversations about things that need to be worked on over the next X period of time. Maybe some competition conversation so that they feel like they have a good sense of what's going on, not just we're doing great, look at our numbers, thank you very much. So the other thing I think you have to do is try to come up with a standardized way of presenting information over time so that every board meeting, they know what to expect, generate some questions ahead of time, and you're going to be comfortable with that. One thing that I've learned through the process of going public that I think applies to your question is that once you bring up something, you should probably plan to talk about it many more times. So if you're going to bring up, say, our closing ratios as a company, guess what? You're going to get asked about that every time now. So be conscientious of what information that you're bringing up, that it's something that's important enough that you want this to become an ongoing conversation.
Makes sense. Yeah. And looking back, I can see how important that is because I will get asked, hey, Dan, last quarter we were here, you said this, how's that going? And so it's important to follow up, which is great. Leadership. I love your leadership, man. Working for you was 5 years of really great results, memories, experiences, and learning when I was at Audience Science. I appreciate that.
That means a lot to me. Thank you.
And we built a hell of a team that just crushed it, which is great. And many of those people have come to work for me multiple times over the course of the years. And that was a long time ago, but all good. So your leadership style. First, I'm a big proponent of values, and I want to know that everybody in the company understands how we roll here as XYZ company. And so I think you start with, your company's mission and your values. Chip, one day I was up at IBM making a sales call, and I walked into their lobby, this gigantic, 5-story high lobby. And I remember the values were emblazoned up on the wall. And then you could literally go into any room, including the men's room in there, and the values would be posted on the wall. And so I thought to myself, well, if IBM's smart enough to do this, if they're doing it, then every company should do it. So values are key. You believe in them, yes. And if so, what are some key important values that you bring with you every time, and that as a board member or investor that you try to kind of push through to make sure that they're part of the company's culture?
Yeah, values, I 100% agree. They're critical. They have to really be consistent with how you're going to run the company. So it cannot be window dressing. If that happens, you're actually going to create the opposite of what you're trying to create. What part of the piece of value is to make people proud and feel part of and all those kinds of things. And if you're not acting the same way that you've written your values, then all of that gets dismantled, right? So you have to make sure that you can live up to the values that your company lives up to, and that that's what you're stating. So that's number one, basically authenticity. The other thing that I often say, I may have even said it to you a long time ago, I don't recall, was the one thing I promise you is recognition and respect. Those things I, as an individual, have control of. I've said this to most of the people who have ever worked with me is recognition and respect I will always give you, and then I live it constantly. I don't take credit for things other people have done. I give them credit, etc. And I think that respect and recognition, as people, we should always do that. It does not take away from your ability to lead a company. It enhances it. And I think that gets forgotten at times.
For sure. So what are some leadership approaches that you use that you could share with a founder that have really been helpful? And then I'm going to ask you the opposite question. But first off, what's a really good approach to leadership in the Jeff Hirsch book?
Well, one of the things that I think is super important is to over communicate. When I first started in business, I thought, I have some smart people. They know what to do. I'll wait and see. And what I realized was that really wasn't fair to people. Smart or not, they may not know what we're trying to achieve or what their role is supposed to accomplish. So being very definitive about here's what we need to do. Here's your role. You can tell me how you want to do it and how you want to get there, but I need to tell you where we need to get. And that was a big piece of learning because it was a little different than how I thought things would be, and different maybe about who I was as a person. And I thought, I don't want to put something on people. I want them to figure it out. And then I realized that really wasn't fair to them. I need to give them the information they need to be successful. And that was much more generous than just letting them be. Also, on the communication front, it's really easy, especially when you're the CEO, to think everybody knows what you know. And because you're living it all the time, you're breathing it every day, you're spending 15 hours, 20 hours talking, thinking about things. In your mind, you start to think, well, everyone knows what's going on, but that's just not true. If you remember, I used to do something called a Monday missive, where every Monday I'd send out an email to the company and put in, 5 or 6 things that were going on. I would lead with a motivational quote. And I would just try to keep people always feeling like they knew what was happening. I also had, and still have, even when I've had hundreds of people working for me, a very open door. My joke has always been, if you send me an email, I will probably reply before you hit send. I'm very on top of communications. I just think people want to know that they can get to me. Now, I'm talking about organizations that max out at about 250 people. So having been CEO of a bigger company, whether this is still possible, but I love that idea that people know that I'm there for them one way or another if they need me. And people respect that and they don't overuse it.
Yep. So without giving me any names, what are some really poor examples of leadership that you have experienced from people who are above you telling you what to do?
Well, one of the things that I've noticed as a pattern is that oftentimes when you are at a company where the founder is the CEO still, meaning that, you've gone through maybe Series B, Series C, it's a mature, not finished growing, but a mature company, and the founder is still the CEO. What seems to be a common theme is that when you bring a new idea that is done differently than how they did it, they don't want to hear it. This is how I've always done it. Look, this company is doing so great. It works. Let's not change it. So, and of course that's true until it's broken. So I found it a very interesting pattern with founders where when they remain the CEO, they are resistant to change, even though they're bringing in super smart people with phenomenal experience that may bring new ideas to them. It's a hard one. One good example of folks who didn't do that are Sergey and Brin from Google. I mean, if you think about it, they turned over this massive company to Eric Schmidt to run a professional manager for 10-ish years. And then they took back over once the company was more mature, more process driven. And those two had also grown into the ability to take on that role. I think that's a great story, but a lot of entrepreneurs have trouble of releasing that control.
I want to hone in on something you said because I'm thinking about it and I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, hundreds. Yeah, we've done that before and it didn't work. It's a laugh, but it's kind of like my wife. She'll say to me, "Here, Dan, try some eggplant." "Honey, I don't like eggplant." "Yeah, but you haven't tried my eggplant." "I don't want your eggplant." Well, last week we went to this Italian restaurant and I know the owner, and my wife and I are sitting at the bar having a drink and looking at the menu, and he comes over, he says, "I want you to try this eggplant dish." I didn't want to tell him no because it was, he was giving it to me for free. So he puts it on the table and I take a bite out of it. It was delicious. And I was stuck because I didn't want to tell my wife that I actually liked his eggplant when I don't like hers. And then later she called me out on it and we had a good chuckle. But I have heard that phrase or that answer over and over and over again. What would you say to that?
I mean, I think one thing is that, well, that's great. So some of the things that didn't work, we can use that in discussing how this might also work, right? So a lot of times I hear that comment and it becomes an objection that you cannot overcome because, again, it's the founder saying this. But as you know, an objection is just a request for more information. And I think that it's important to be able to get past that sense, because you're not going to do things the same way. Most likely, the market has changed, your customers have changed, your product has changed. We're not repeating the same thing you did before. We are in a new world, even if it was 2 months ago, that we should allow ourselves to talk about these ideas and learn from what might have happened before and see how we can possibly do that better.
I think that'd be a really good conversation. So you could start with, as your answer to the question, hey, let's try it this way. Instead of saying, yeah, we did that and it didn't work, I might now, through your advice, Jeff, say to that person, that's a really good question. We tried that a few years ago and it didn't work out for us, but I'd love to resurface that to see why it didn't work and then try to understand how you might do it differently and how the market has changed. Let's give that a shot. I think I'd get a lot more respect as a leader if I approached it that way than, yeah, no, tried that, didn't work.
Or you could even, if you want to not even get to that point of progressing the conversation, do it just like, I would love to learn more about that experience for me as one of your key executives to know more about this company and some of the history that has led us to where we are. So now it's going to get talked about and it's going to become quite obvious that some of these things aren't real blockers. But all you really did was ask to learn more about what happened last time.
Yep. That's really important. Any other don'ts that you could offer, or even do's and don'ts that you could offer a founder at a startup today, any stage startup, because you're a startup for a while. And I know you've been there, done that.
Again, going back to the founder recognizing things in themselves. And Dan, I know you've talked about some of this in some of your other episodes. When the company's first starting, the founder is going out and doing most of the selling. And then when it's time to turn it over to somebody else, they have a very hard time, or they have expectations that are not realistic. And I think the founder has to recognize that, first of all, they're going out after what are probably the easier pickings, either through connections they have or some reason that they started the company that's quite obvious. So number one, it's not necessarily a scalable experience. Number two, they have some unique characteristics as the founder. One is their passion. No matter how passionate we are about a company, the founder will have more, so they can bring that into every situation. But the most important one is that they can commit to things in a meeting that their people cannot. So I find a lot of founders close a lot of deals by doing things for the customer that as a sales executive, you're not allowed to do. And if you want to, it's going to take a lot of steps to get it approved. So of course, the process will take longer. And of course, you'll have a lower closing ratio. So a founder assuming that their sales experience should be replicated by their new sales executives is faulty from the start.
That's really important for sure. And, it's funny because I listen to you and I'm thinking about experiences in my life where the founder knew exactly what they were doing and when it came to how to sell the product that they built and created themselves. And now my job is to go out there and replicate some version of that over a sales team of, 10, 20, 30 people. And I got to get them to perform quickly. And that's hard stuff. So I guess the lesson is, if you're a founder, the more you can memorialize from day one about what works, what doesn't work. Imagine this. Imagine if every one of your calls today, here we are, late 2024, every one of your calls with your prospects, your customers, even some certain ones that are internal, are now recorded using an AI companion, right? Like a Fireflies. And you took all those recordings and you created a playbook out of them. You now have something that is organized and like AI driven that you can hand your future employees and say, here, this is everything I've done since I've started the company, put together for you in a nice, tight playbook, which we never had in the past. That is a huge advantage that I would be taking, that I would for sure be using or doing if I started a company today. And in fact, moving forward, that's something that is part of my practice.
Sure. No, I think that makes great sense. I actually, again, going back to listening to some of your past conversations with other folks, one of the things, this is directly related to what you were just saying. One of the things that you talk about is early on, hire two very senior sales execs to get into the market. I'm actually going to modify that from my point of view is hire a senior sales exec and hire a senior product marketing person. Okay. The reason why is because sales people are usually not as good at documenting and process and things like that. So if you have that product marketer with you on calls and they're out in the field, the salesperson's coming back and using that to go after more business. The product marketer's going back and using that to continue to own the message and the sales material and create scalability already. So then when the time comes to start hiring a larger sales staff, you're way ahead of the game. So I agree with your premise that you have spoken to about getting people in the field talking to customers other than the founder as quickly as possible. I would just tweak it a bit so that you also have someone who's already capturing it in a way that you can scale from very quickly. And your comment about AI could be a great way that happens in the future. So maybe you don't need to hire that product marketing.
Well, I don't know. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking more and more. For the last year or so, I've been realizing that sales and marketing are one more than they have been ever. They used to be two completely separate departments, divisions, and they'd work together, but they're really responsible for the same thing nowadays. And there's so much more emphasis on content-driven marketing to generate business and even build your brand around thought leadership that I think that sales and marketing are one. And you know what? Instead of hiring two really strong salespeople, I would consider for sure hiring one strong sales leader and one strong product marketing leader and put them together and get them out in the marketplace. And it may not be long-term as much revenue than two revenue leaders. No, let me rephrase that. It may not be short-term as much revenue, but in the long run, it's a lot better. That's a smarter way to do it. I like that, Jeff.
When you start to scale, if I could change Dan's mind around something, then he's my CEO because he's willing to accept change. The short term for the long term is absolutely true, and the long term you get more velocity, right? So the other thing that I think that gives you one of the key things I find that are problematic in how companies are run is data tracking around the sales process, sales funnel, stage, velocity, and all those things. It's super important to understand as early as you can what are the things that statistically get you to close, and how do you value those more in the process, right? So maybe it's a proposal, maybe it's a presentation, whatever it might be. And so a product marketer is thinking that way about how do I put more emphasis on this, getting from stage here to here, because I know the value of that's going to come out on the other end.
Yep. Love it. Love it. So Jeff, for people that want to get in touch with you, how do we do that? Where do we find Jeff Hirsch?
Thanks, Dan. My company's called Executive Guru. My website is executiveconsulting.guru. And I love talking to people. So anyone more than willing to take inbound comments and questions. I probably give away too much of my stuff for free, but I really do love having conversations, sharing things I've learned, learning things from other people, and then hopefully finding a way to work together.
That philosophy has always worked for me as well. I appreciate it. To pay it forward. I've been around the block so many times. I've learned so much along the way, and that's why I asked you what not to do. I've learned a lot of what not to do. If I can help one person get a little bit better because I've experienced what they haven't and give them a heads up on what to look for around the corner, that's super helpful. I think that's great. So,
Dan, can I tell the one story I have that I repeat about you at Audience Science? Is
nice shit. Where's this going, man? Go ahead.
It's very telling because here I was the CEO, used to doing all the selling and figuring out the sales process and all those things. So when I came to New York one time, and you were basically running the New York office, I came to New York and I started talking about something, a storyline about our products and services. And you said, Jeff, stop spinning this. That's my job. And the thing about it that was so fascinating was it actually let me step back and being humble myself and say, oh, I have someone who can take this and run. That's amazing. And I felt a sense of relief, even though it was a funny thing to say. It actually represented to me that, okay, I have someone I can trust. I can let this go into his hands and he's going to make it happen. So it was a good story.
I remember that actually, because when I had asked you the question, I would get all of the lipstick and the makeup and all that stuff on. And I said, no. I want to see the raw, clean. I want to see it. I'll put the lipstick on it. And I do remember that. That's great. Well, I guess that's good that you remember me that way. We're both makeup artists.
Exactly. Right.
Awesome. Hey, this has been a great conversation. I appreciate you for being on today. Thanks so much. And look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Dan. Me too.
All right.